Many times we don't understand the law. Law for the People with Eric Cedillo is here to inform, educate, and answer your legal questions. Thank you for tuning in today. From the law offices of Eric Cedillo, located at 1725 Greenville Avenue in Dallas, Texas, here's your host, Eric Cedillo.
Hey guys, thank you so much for joining us on Law for the People with your host, me, Eric Cedillo. As always, we come to you on Friday afternoons. Thanks for joining in. As always, here on Law for the People, when we talk about the area of law, we're usually talking about the state of Texas and the law that applies here. But today we have a couple of wonderful guests, our first being Mr. David Blewett, who is running for City Council here in the city of Dallas in District 14. So why don't we just jump right on into it. David, why don't you introduce yourselves and tell us what you're all about.
All right. Eric, first of all, thank you for having me on your show, and I'm happy to come in and talk about all kinds of issues today, so thank you.
Absolutely.
My name is David Blewett. I'm a longtime resident of District 14 here in East Dallas. I went to SMU back in the mid-'80s. I played football there, defensive end. We talked a little bit about that. My football career ended. I ended up staying at SMU, graduated in 1989 with 2 degrees, one in philosophy and the other in business. I got transferred to Detroit, Michigan for a few years, where I went to night school and got my MBA in finance.
Oh, cool.
And then I decided I wanted to come back to Dallas. So I came back here in 1994, got in the mortgage business, worked for a mortgage bank for a number of years, started my own company in 1999, and I've been involved in real estate as a mortgage broker, a mortgage banker, and as a realtor since the mid-'90s. I got married to Kristen Blewett now in 1998. We have 7 children. All of them are in DISD schools. My oldest just graduated from SEM down at the Townview system, and she's going to be going to Oklahoma next year. And I have a bunch of kids in between, all the way down to 3 years old.
3 years old.
Down to 3 years old. So all my friends that are empty nesters now are kind of laughing at me because I'm barely out of diapers, diaper changing, but that's been our life.
Yeah.
So beyond that, we've lived in the M Streets, and I years ago got involved in the Crime Watch to kind of, after the Central Expressway expansion of the early 90s, a lot of crime came into East Dallas, and so the Crime Watch and extended patrol became kind of a big deal, and I got involved in that. It was important for me to make sure that it was safe. And then later on, as my kids got into school, I got more involved in different organizations that had to do with the public schools. So I've been involved in crime watches and public schools, and in the Greenville Avenue events, I was appointed to some things to help manage that process back in the early 2000s. All these things kind of got me ready for for a political future.
Right.
And 6 years ago, I ran when Angela Hunt got term limited out. There were 7 of us that ran. I came in 4th. I learned a lot. I put my head down, got more involved in different things, and felt like this was a good opportunity for me to get back out there. And so I'm running again this time.
Yeah, I think it's amazing you have 7 children and you're able to spend some time with us today.
Yeah.
I know we've got 4 kiddos and it's rough. I could imagine 7 and the ages, which is incredible. We've got one that's older and one that's a little bit younger, but you've got them all in between.
Yeah, people laugh at me. I say, "Oh, you have an MBA in finance," but I didn't do the math right on this because. The math didn't work. But it's all good. I get that. It's all good.
Well, David, since we have an opportunity here to spend some time and kind of get to know you a little bit, what we love to do on the show is to kind of backtrack a little bit, kind of see where folks are from, who they were, and usually what I'd like to do is ask what your parents did for a living and where you kind of grew up, and I think that always segues into something that gives us an opportunity to see who you are, what you're kind of all about. So.
The easiest way to describe myself really is the 2 degrees that I tried to get.
Okay.
I got a degree in philosophy because it was interesting to me, and I got a business degree because I thought that's what I would need to do to make a living. And I really am kind of 2 different people. I went to SMU, but I went to SMU on a football scholarship. I didn't have enough money to go there. My dad was the first one in my family to go to college. He went on the GI Bill. I was only able to go to college because of a football scholarship. Yeah. My grandfather was a blue-collar union worker in Northern California. Before that, he worked on the train as a conductor. He built his own house. I joke about it quite a bit, that if he came to Dallas today and saw the life that my wife and I have built, he would be amazed.
Really?
Because we are 2 generations away from a very different place.
Yeah.
And I try and keep that framework in my mind as I think about Dallas, as I think about politics, I think about who I want to be. What would my grandfather think about a couple of degrees, a master's degree, a nice house, a big family, the life that we've built. And then I look at other people who are really still in the same situation that he is, without having the opportunity to go to college, blue collar, working hard for every nickel. And these are the people that I really think about a lot, that I want to remember that that's where I came from.
Yeah. Your dad, what did he do for a living?
My dad wanted to go to college and he wanted to get out of the small town that they lived in, and the military was the easiest way for him to do that. And after the Army, he went to Sacramento State and got a degree in education, became a teacher for a couple of years, and then decided that wasn't for him and became an insurance adjuster. So white collar, got to wear a suit.
Yeah. And your mom?
My mom's a social worker. She just died in May, in the middle of the campaign. It was kind of an interesting ride. You want to talk about getting to know me.
Wow.
2 weeks after I announced, she died suddenly. There was no warning. She lived in Arizona, and so I suspended the campaign and went out there and took care of some family business, got my head on, came back out here. My sister is the one who told me that Mom would have wanted me to stay in the campaign and win this thing. So, but I'll tell you, candidly, I thought about dropping out, so she retired, long-time child protective services. I grew up hearing stories about how she'd go into terrible homes and having to remove children. And it was an interesting dinner table conversations hearing about what she did her whole career.
Well, my condolences.
Thank you.
My mother passed about 9 years ago, and to this day, it's kind of just talking about her is kind of incredibly evocative and kind of tough to deal with sometimes.
What I've learned about that, I'm 53 years old, and I thought the older that I got, the less of an impact that would be. And I had some people tell me, don't kid yourself. No matter how old you are, it's still your mom.
That's right.
And it hit me a lot harder than I thought it would.
Yeah. And your dad, is he
My dad's still
with us?
alive. He's 80. He was just in town for my daughter's graduation.
Okay.
So he's still in Denver, and he's retired, and he travels quite a bit, and he's just kind of living the life.
Yeah. In a few minutes, I'd like to talk about that interplay between, the school district, DISD, and what maybe the responsibilities the city might have and city council. Before we get there, if you feel, 7 kiddos, one oldest just graduated from Townview, which is wonderful. My daughter graduated from TAG Townview a few years back. Sure. Tell us about that in terms of, they're all in public schools here in DISD?
Well, I say that because it's an easier answer, but my 3-year-old obviously isn't there yet, but he will be. So I just say they're all in DISD because they will be. We bought our house in the M Streets in '99. We had our first kid in '01, and it was easy having a little kid over there. And then we get to age 3, 4, 5, and you're having to make decisions on schools. Yeah. And DISD schools were good, but let's be clear, they have improved quite a bit in the last 10 or 15 years. Back then, it was still not a done deal. And a lot of our younger friends who were neighbors who also had kids about the same time, a lot of them moved to the Park Cities, moved to suburbs. A lot of went to private school. My wife grew up in Cincinnati. Both of her parents are career teachers in the inner city Cincinnati public school system. Okay. She was a product of that as well. Got an IB degree, International Baccalaureate degree, at a school very similar to Withrow. It's called Withrow, very similar to Woodrow Wilson. Okay. So her perspective was, we can make the public schools work, we're going to try it, and I agreed to try it. I wasn't sure. I grew up in Denver, but I grew up in a suburb of Denver and wasn't really as familiar with the urban, big public school system like she was. Right. So we tried it, and what we found was the schools were great, the teachers were great, the administration was great. All the different kids and influences that came into the school was nothing but positive. And so we tried it in kindergarten and second and third. And third grade is when a lot of people then kind of made the break, as you kind of figure out if you're going to stick it out or you're going to go somewhere else. So the first thing is, where are you going to go to school? The second thing is, after third grade, are you going to stay? Right. We were having such a great experience with it, we stayed. And then we just kind of tracked all of them behind the first one because we understood the system. And DISD at that same time, you mentioned your daughter going to TAG. What DISD made the decision on, say, a decade or so ago, was to give some of us options for kids who want to try different things. I mentioned the IB program. So a lot of schools now have the IB program here in Dallas, and the magnet schools for middle and high school were an attractive option as well. And so my kids kind of tracked that way and gave us options and gave us flexibility, and the DISD experience has been great.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that when they talk about DISD over the last few years. They've just really become a model, I think, for the state. And I think the state of Texas is kind of recognizing that, seeing where we are. However, I think last couple of terms, I think the mayor tried to assist the city council in becoming more involved in DISD. Right. For me, I think that's very important. There's so many issues that kind of come together. We talk about our high, child poverty rate here in the city of Dallas, and in all honesty, we're talking about DISD is mainly, I think, 93, 94% faces of color. What do you think in terms of that interplay? What the city's responsibility as a city council person, if any, to DISD? Because people may not realize this, but they're two incredibly separate entities in terms of how they put things together, their budgeting and everything else. I don't know that we've ever had a real strong effort on the city council to kind of create either a czar or some other opportunity to kind of work with DISD. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, quite a few.
Okay.
6 years ago I ran, and I talked, because it was a concern of mine also, that I wanted more younger families having the same experiences that we did. Right. And I was very concerned that the young families who would leave as soon as they hit third grade, let's say, that it would be damaging to the city of Dallas, that we needed to, and city council, really embrace DISD getting better, because really if you're going to stay here and build your life, the city has to provide public safety, they have to provide infrastructure, roads that work, right, fixing the potholes, these are things we agree on, quality of life issues that are important, but you simply have to give people good public school options to be able to build their families here. So I started talking about it 6 years ago, and I was hit pretty hard on it because I was told there's separation, Dallas Independent School District. A number of times I was told it's independent, it's independent, it's independent. And I kept pushing back saying, guys, if you don't have a good school, you can't have a good neighborhood. And if you don't have a good neighborhood, you can't have a good city. These things all feed into each other. Right. So I am actually more enthusiastic about more politicians now, more city council people, the mayor, whomever, talking about the importance of public schools, because it is independent, but it's critical that it works. Right. So what's the role? The role of city government is to ensure safe access to the schools, and that means lit, well-marked crosswalks so that kids can walk to and from schools. It means anything that has to do with security and safety that comes from us. It's not just DISD has their own police force, but we have to ensure that our children are protected, whether they're at the parks or at the schools. So that's a city function. But something else you touch on is, if you're fortunate enough and you have the responsibility of being an elected official, you get a platform. And the platform means you get to raise your hand and you get to jump up and down and point out things that are important. And so I think that it's incredibly important for us to point out that school, as a public official, that public schools work, that you should try it, and encourage parents to get involved, encourage people to put their kids in the schools, and also encourage people who don't have kids that your neighborhood school is important and you can volunteer too. And we see that at a lot of our school. There are a lot of there are a lot of adults who are engaged who don't have kids at the schools because they recognize how important it is. That's the role you can do. You can be a cheerleader for DISD, because we need more of our families, more of our kids going to our public schools. I don't want to be critical of the private schools, they serve a function, but we pay a lot of property taxes for our public schools. We need to use them. Yeah. No doubt, no doubt. You mentioned, and I didn't know this, quite honestly, your interest a few years back in terms of that interplay between DISD and City Council. What are some other big ticket issues for you on the City Council? What are the things that you kind of want to jump into if you do, in fact, get elected? I mentioned the 3.5 bullet point items that we always talk about, public safety, infrastructure, quality of life, and then the half I say is public education, because it's not truly under our control. But public safety is number one, and we're seeing that more and more. It's not a budgetary thing when we're down 800 officers or 1,000 officers. I mean, that's a statistic. The real issue is we don't have a show of force in areas that we need to have a show of force because we're light on manpower. And because of that, we're now seeing things downtown. We're seeing aggressive panhandling. We're seeing a lot more property crime on the east side of the district, and not so much violence on the east side, but truthfully, if we don't get ahead of this, we're going to start seeing that too. And you are seeing a lot more violence over in Oak Lawn area and on the west side of the district. The easiest stat that we can talk about is the number of murders that we had in May. Now, that's not a direct result of manpower, but it's sure an indirect result because we just don't have the manpower. And so public safety is the primary responsibility of city government. And that means code enforcement, it means police officers, fire, it means everything that we're paying for.
Yeah.
So those are things that I'm going to be focused on. I think that my rival has taken his eye off the ball. I think he's interested in things that are what I would say interesting. Some of them are even important, but they're not critical. And I think that when I talk to people in our district, they want to feel safe.
Yeah.
And that's the primary thing that I'll be focused on.
Yeah. We, folks who may be listening in from other areas of the country may not realize the city of Dallas just had about 40 murders in May, which is an incredible number for our city.
I think we tracked about 9 per month, and so something's going on.
Yeah. Something's happening. We're hitting into June, and I think we already have 4 or 5, I believe.
Yeah, and some children,
Yeah.
some younger people.
Yeah.
So we've got a problem that seems to be growing, and you ask anybody in law enforcement, and they'll tell you, you get in the summer months, that trends up. So we've got a problem.
There is no doubt, and I don't think anybody would argue this, we are short on the number of police officers we have. There's a few reasons, I think, why. Of course, the kind of the failure of our pension system with police and fire was an issue.
Yes.
That hopefully has been resolved to the extent that that's taken care of. However, we're still paying into it. Mm-hmm. Budget-wise, why don't we have more officers? Why aren't we bringing more officers in? Why are we not attracting more officers? And since everybody knows that's an issue, what do you think the issue is with respect to that, and how do we address it?
A lot of these issues, a lot of these aspects of this issue are a national phenomenon. We're having trouble hiring officers in a lot of major markets. So this is not something that's just a Dallas problem. But because we have so many cities around us that don't have an academy, that need officers too, they're growing, Frisco, Plano, pick your city, they're raiding our officer corps, and we've given them an opening. We've given them an opening, like you mentioned on the pension. You talk officers that are 10 or 15 years in, and they're nervous about these things, and then they're young enough that they can still put in their time in a different force. So. And the older officers are very concerned about this because they know that the culture of Dallas, the Dallas police force has a great culture for a big city. I've lived in a lot of big cities, and Dallas is blessed to have the culture that we do. And so you have the older officers who are terming out or they're retiring. You've got the younger officers coming through the academy that don't have the culture yet. And then you have the middle tier officers that you need to rely on to kind of maintain that culture that are being raided. The pension is a big thing, but I do not want to get into an arms race. And some of my rival and others talk about we've got to just pay them more and more and more. And I won't make a lot of friends, I suppose, with the first responders, but I don't want to get into that arms race. I think the pension is more important than the actual salary, but I do want them paid in a comparable way. I just don't want to see it become, I'll use the term arms race again. But when I talk to different officers, what they really want, they want to know that we have their backs. They want to know that it's a team effort, that if something happens, and it's going to happen, it's just the statistics are, if they're going into rough areas and dealing with rough things, it's just a matter of time. They don't want to immediately be called out as the problem.
Oh.
A specific officer might have a problem, but the force itself is not the problem. And I don't think it's helpful for us to, and some of our leaders have done this, just blanket criticize the force.
Yeah.
That doesn't do good things for morale. So that's a team effort, communication, making sure that everybody knows that we have the same goals and working together. They also want the tools to do their job. I talk quite a bit. We talk a lot about the teen curfew. I don't know if that's one of your questions you wanted to ask me about, but I grew up in Denver where we had a teen curfew, and I don't remember it being an issue other than I was 16 years old and it got late and I knew I had to go home. The cops asked for that tool. We basically told them they couldn't or shouldn't have it because they were going to be oppressive and they were going to misuse that tool. that message, it's bigger than the actual tool of the curfew. It's the message. It's the ability to talk to the officers and what do they want. This is their job. They should know these things better than us. We should listen to them. And then we make decisions whether or not it works for our society. But if they're asking for tools, we need to listen to them.
Yeah.
And I'll go further on that subject of, I look at DA Crusoe's $750 initiative on property crime, which I don't know how specific I need to get on your show if people already know what that is, but the basics are that he's not going to prosecute certain types of criminal activity at low dollar thresholds, especially if it is need-based. Not so much you're stealing something for resale or for pleasure, but if it's, the example is like diapers or something. I think the intent there is good, but if you talk to the police officers, they don't like it because they don't understand it. So that's something that is something we should do as leaders. We should be able to communicate, get buy-in from them about what a new policy is, what the intent is, so that they understand it and can actually implement it. We haven't done that. We're going to have to, and that's why DA Crusoe is going around to a variety of shows trying to clean it up and trying to tell people what it is, because I can tell you that business owners, citizens, officers, nobody likes this policy because they all think it means that criminals can do whatever they want. And then, of course, they look at the crime stats going up and they get really nervous.
Yeah.
So these are tools that we have to do to be a team. All of it goes, I'm sorry, long answer, but
No.
But the real thing is, this is a complex thing. It is about making sure that we are all on the same team, giving them the tools and support to do their jobs, and fairly compensating them. And then we can stop the runoff of the officers leaving. We do have a number of officers coming through the academy, so there are people who want to be cops here. We just have to stop the runoff.
Yeah, we certainly, these issues, you bring them up and let's talk about them. That's what we're here to do, and hear from you as a candidate and what and how what your take is on it. Specifically, though, you brought up the curfew. I think a lot of the issue, not so much the curfew itself. Well, for some, it certainly is a huge issue, having a curfew versus not having a curfew. But I think it was the application of the curfew in some areas where people felt like, you're misusing this. You're directing it to communities of color more so than in other areas. How do you feel about that, and what would your response be to that? Do we have an obligation as a city to be looking, hey, look, this is a misapplication, or you're using it too much in this area, or we don't, we shouldn't be overseeing what the police officers are doing?
That's a legitimate, it's not a criticism, it's a legitimate observation or point. I don't know exactly the stats on where they have enforced the teen curfew.
No.
But you bring up communities of color, and it's not so much communities of color. There's different. If the right word is culture, I don't see, for example, in East Dallas, you just don't see a lot of 16-year-olds out on the streets doing anything. They might be at the parks, or they might be kind of messing around, but it's not. I think the 16-year-old in the street in East Dallas is different than a 16-year-old in the West Dallas or South Dallas, and so the police probably look at that differently, and that may feed into the statistics of who it is that they're using that tool on. And I think it's something to be very sensitive to, because I think the relationship between police officers and the local community is something that is different in different communities. A cop drives down my street, I don't think twice about it. A cop drives down your street, maybe you see it a little bit differently, and we need to be aware of that perception.
Yeah.
And the teen curfew might be one of those things. All I'm saying is the officers asked for that as a tool. They think it's an important tool. It's a civil issue. They get to ask them twice to go home. If they disobey them, they can write them a ticket. I think it's $50. This is not something where they're going to be using it to put them in jail or put them in the criminal system. It's just to get them to go home at a certain time. If I'm wrong about that, then I'd like to revisit it. But I'd like to have that conversation openly and honestly. And yes, certain communities, we need to be aware of what their perceptions are of this.
Yeah, and there's no doubt over the last few years we've had certainly a national issue, a recognition that you're absolutely right. I know a lot of Dallas police officers, and as a group, just wonderful folks across the board. There are some folks some police officers who can be bad apples, in all honesty, and just in any force that's kind of out there.
That's what it is.
Absolutely. And it's a situation where here in the city of Dallas, historically, we'd had a relatively good relationship, I think, with with our police officers. And then, lots of stuff started happening around the country, and we started looking at things a little bit differently. Certainly, the police shootings a couple of years back was incredibly hurtful, harmful to our city.
I think we're still paying the price in the police force, too.
What do you think the responsibility of a city council person is to develop that relationship? And do you think the chief is doing a good job in terms of upkeep on morale, or is that something you kind of want to look at and visit in terms of our relationship with the DPD?
I would like to hold off on answering on Chief Hall
Okay.
Until after I win on Saturday,
Okay.
and when my responsibilities change a little bit. So I won't comment on her other than I'm disappointed in our reaction to the recent murders and our readiness. We should have seen these things. These stats didn't just come this week. They've been building. So I'm disappointed in that.
Anything in particular? What specifically did we not anticipate or kind of do that?
I joke about that it's a math problem. We didn't have 41 murders on the 31st of May.
Right.
I mean, if we've been trending at 9, we certainly had more than 9 in the first week of May. That's a problem. And I think that we should have seen, and then by that, murder's the easy one, right? Because you can see that number. Clearly, it's not a measuring statistic; it's a real number. But other violent crime have been coming up year to date. I mean, through May, violent crime was up 27%. That didn't just happen in May. This has been coming, and beyond that, as soon as we knew the officers were down 800 or 1,000, again, I'm not a law enforcement professional, but I understand when you're down 30% of the number of officers, then you're going to have a knock-on effect of something. And my guess is it's going to be rising crime.
Yeah.
The best way that I could, beyond the actual numbers, when I was involved in the M Streets Crime Watch, there's a guy who lived in the neighborhood. His name is Joe Chatham. He's a motorcycle cop. He lived in the neighborhood, and he ran our extended patrol, and I got to know him pretty well. His kids went to the old Stonewall Jackson Elementary, which is now called Mockingbird. And he did it on his own initiative. First day of school, he would ride his motorcycle in uniform.
Yeah, Joe.
You know Joe?
Know of him, certainly.
Okay, he would ride his motorcycle over to the school in uniform, park the motorcycle out there, and encourage all the kids to get on the motorcycle and pretend like they were riding it and interact with him. And so you had all these kids from all kinds of backgrounds who their first real interaction with a police officer was a cool officer on a motorcycle.
Yeah.
That kind of community outreach, I think, makes a big difference when that kid turns 8, 10, 12 years old.
Totally agree, yeah.
I would like to see a lot more of that. Get the officers up close and personal with the kids all over the city. I love that idea.
Yeah.
Take the fear out of these guys away. Get to know them. They're real people. They care.
Right.
I mean, and another example of that would be St. Patrick's Day on Greenville Avenue. So I said I was involved in that. So I was appointed by City Council to represent the M Streets back in the early 2000s when they wanted to shut the parade and the events down because it was totally out of control. And I don't know if your listeners know what Dallas does on St. Patrick's Day, but we have a historical parade that ended on Lower Greenville, the street over here, and it ended up in a street party that got out of control. People would be drunk in the streets, and the officers got upset about it because they'd end up blocking off the street, diverting traffic. It was unsafe. If there was a fire, the fire department couldn't get in, and so the city wanted to shut the whole event down. We went into a room, 6 neighborhoods, the cops, the firemen, city officials, and we fought, and the bar and restaurant owners, and we fought for a few months about whether or not we were going to continue this event, and we hammered out a deal. And the deal was a fenced-in party under a permit. I think it was 12 to 6. They had one-sided parking in the neighborhoods to protect the neighborhoods so the police and fire could get in and out. We had trash cans strategically placed all throughout that the bars would pay for. We had extra officers that they agreed to pay for. So we were able to create an event that the neighborhood had buy-in, the city had buy-in, the police had buy-in, and it worked. So here we are 15 years later. They're still using the same permit that we hammered out. It's been tweaked a little bit. But I was at the St. Patrick's Day events this year, and it's completely out of control. I mean, there's 140,000 people. It is all over the place. Yeah. And quite frankly, we didn't have enough officers. We had a lot of volunteer. I talked to a number of them. 30-odd volunteer reserve officers were there just as a show of force. And the biggest portion of the party was outside the permitted party. And I looked at all the kids having a good time and all the officers having a good time, and they were taking selfies with each other. It was a great environment. There was no violence. The cops were interacting with the partygoers and back and forth. And I think that's another example of, it's a positive thing, that the police are real people just like us.
Yeah.
We need to do more of that too.
Yeah.
So
we talk about stepping on toes and crossing and doing. Certainly the city council, responsible for, running government and other things. How do you think the chief might take that? Hey, we need more of this. We need to have more programs like that. And does the city council have a responsibility to kind of create that or become part of it?
I see my role as a city council person is to gather information and to give the best advice that I can. The job is pretty complex. If I were to try and present myself as the expert in criminal justice or the expert in a whole host of different things that the city does,
yeah.
I would have no time to do anything. And quite frankly, I don't think it's a good thing for one person to have all the answers. So in terms of addressing the manpower and addressing crime stats, I'll be looking to professionals, and the best advice that I can get or the best things that I can read or come in contact with, best practices from other cities that might be doing it better, and encouraging our professionals to adopt those. If I don't see that kind of response, that's on them, because that's their job. It's my job to hold them accountable, because I work for the people, make sure the people are served. But the law enforcement professionals, I don't want to get too much into the weeds of exactly what the staffing should be in Central Division, or exactly how many people should be on, a SWAT team. These are not things that make sense for a city council person to know in intimate detail. But I do expect a response from our professionals when things are happening like they are right now.
Yeah. Well, as a citizen and somebody who's got an unadulterated look at how things, we need more police officers. We need more police officers, and I think we need a better engagement between our DPD and the citizenry. I think it's commonsensical to the extent that you show kids that the police can be very good people. And somebody you can turn to. I think that's a wonderful concept and a wonderful thing. My two daughters went to Stonewall when it was Stonewall, and I was actually a break dancer in the early '80s.
Oh, really?
At the first, you talk about the Greenville Avenue Parade.
Uh-oh.
I remember doing that in the early '80s. So
maybe we crossed paths.
Been around for a little while, man. It's been around for a little while. Okay, the additional one here in the city of Dallas, the pothole situation has become incredibly unbearable. My goodness, we're right here on Greenville Avenue right now, but you go down a couple of streets over on Henderson, and I don't know what the heck's going on over there, but I stopped driving that street because of the potholes that were going on. Where is that? And everything has to do with the budget. I understand that. We put in a certain amount of monies in terms of how many police officers we bring on, how we deal with, streets and other things. We've had some bond monies that have been, specifically earmarked, and it doesn't seem like we've spent as much as we could have. What is the holdup? What can we do better? And how does that, what are you kind of looking at in terms of making something happen when you come on the council?
My daughter broke a rim for the first time. She's 18, so I guess I'm lucky she hasn't been driving that long. And I know to avoid potholes, you probably do too, because we've been driving for a while. But the roads are bad, and if you mistime something, then you're going to hit a pretty bad one. And we have a big issue with this. The bond money you bring up, we have funded quite a bit of money for road improvement. It is, unfortunately, because we haven't been paying attention to it for years, it is, we have a lot of work to do to catch up. And it's not just in East Dallas. I mean, if you get into other parts of Dallas, the sad thing is our roads are pretty good compared to other parts of Dallas. I mean, it's terrible when you get to West Dallas and South Dallas. And so we have a massive city problem where we haven't paid attention to our infrastructure, and it's traffic lights, and it's these roads that are they've been ignored for years. Then you get to accountability. The road, like I'll go back just Henderson. They've patched it and patched it and patched it poorly.
Right.
And I don't understand why we don't have better accountability for, if you're going to patch it.
Who are we contracting with? To
patch it right. And I joke about it. It's not just that, they patch it right. It's if you had something break at your house, if you had a plumber that came to fix something, or even a landscaper, I don't care what it is, you get either an express or an implied warranty. And the warranty is if they don't do it right, they got to come back out and fix it. And I would like to see that kind of accountability for fixing our roads. If there's a pothole that's been called in, it needs to be fixed. It needs to be fixed right. If it washes out 30 days later because they did it poorly, it needs to be first on the list to go back out, and that is their job to fix it the right way and for it to be durable for at least 6 months, let's say.
Right.
We're not doing that. I don't understand that. It's something I'm going to figure out why.
In all honesty, I think it's intentional. I think these folks are doing this so that you have to go back and fix it up. And if you make it on the city council, I'm going to check in with you, David, and say, hey, what's going on with this?
Because we do have the money, but a lot of it is, like I said, it's legacy, and it's we're now having to spend a ton of money to fix problems that we ignored for years.
Right. Okay. Any other issues? We're kind of running a little short on time in terms of what's there. We've kind of covered your major platform and submission.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else you want to throw in terms of what's important to you once you make it on the city council?
The biggest thing, I have a history of being a mortgage broker, mortgage banker, real estate finance, and I talked about being a young family buying my first house in the M Streets, and when I'm out talking all over District 14, the term gentrification or housing affordability comes up over and over again. You know, there are few tools that a city council person can do to make houses more affordable. But one thing we can do is to encourage more supply. We're going to need to build more houses, more townhomes, duplexes, because we have so many people moving here, and they all want to stay. We need to give them the options to be able to stay here and build their lives, and that means more supply of the housing that they can afford.
Hey guys, thank you so much for rejoining us. We just had a slight technical difficulty. Thanks for coming back. We're finishing up with our first guest. Mr. David Blewett is running for District Council on number 14. David, just kind of finalize and follow up and end this part of the show. Tell us a little bit about when Election Day is and any final parting words you want to share with us.
Well, first of all, I'd say thank you for having me in. It's been a good conversation.
Yeah.
We talked about things that are important for the city of Dallas and for District 14. The election is tomorrow. It's Saturday, June 8th. We've had good turnout for early voting, which ended last Tuesday. And so the final election on this runoff, we're trying to get all of our voters back to come out to remind them that this is a runoff election, and encourage you to vote for David Blewett.
Appreciate you coming out, man. Good luck June 8th at the election. Dallas, get out there and vote. It's really important. We need to get an uptick in the numbers of folks coming out and voting. We're a little short this last go around, and hopefully we have a higher percentage of folks coming out. So thanks David.
Sir.
Appreciate you coming out, and good luck on your
sir. Appreciate it.
The law offices of Eric Cedillo, a professional corporation, a firm that handles legal matters in personal injury, auto and truck accidents, wrongful death, on-the-job injuries, criminal felony and misdemeanor, family law, divorce, and child custody. The law offices of Eric Cedillo, located at 1725 Greenville Avenue in Dallas, at 214-740-1628. That's 214-740-1628. Find them on the web at cedillolaw.com. That's cedillolaw.com.